Hi, everybody, and welcome to Children's Health Defense Canada. My name is Amanda Forbes. It is Tuesday, January the 24th, and I am here today with CHD Canada's Provincial Director of Alberta, Miss Sherry Strong, who is here to talk to us about regenerative food philosophy. And I struggle to say that word out loud. I stumble on it every single time. So, Sherry, welcome. Thank you for being here and discussing this with us again.
My pleasure, Amanda. It's great to be back. The two of us without unexpected guests.
Without unexpected guests. And for those of you that joined us on our Zoom, you'll know what we're talking about. And for those of you that don't, we'll just leave it up to the imagination. Wonderful. Let's get started. There's so much to talk about with regards to this and the benefits of this. But before we get started, I want you to tell us a bit about your journey and how you've come to do what you're doing.
Thanks, Amanda. It's such an honor to be able to share. I started studying nutrition, food and nutrition 41 years ago and loved it. Like I often say to people, I don't know if they're past lives or future lives for sure, but if there is, I know for certain I came to this incarnation for the food. So I always loved food, but I also had an emotional relationship with it. And so it wasn't always a joyful thing in that I often chose foods that made me feel good in the moment, but terrible afterwards and caused all kinds of health problems. So I had an interest in food that tasted good. I had an interest in cooking. And I think initially I was fearful about studying the nutrition part in depth. I like the geeky side of things, but turning it on myself was a little bit tricky. I went on to study to become a missionary. Wasn't very good at it. Like to joke that I was discovered the position, found it, was much better at the position than the vocation. Left religious life and went on to Australia, where I became a chef, and I opened a cooking school. And I started to teach people how to just cook like naturally low-fat food. So I would say if you want a creme brulee with half the fat, make a creme brulee, but only have half the portion. Rather than the kind of versions we try to create that have all kinds of gunk in them that's not actually, it's even less healthy than the so-called healthy version, the natural version. So when I started doing those classes, I got the attention of a dietitian and a doctor who were specifically working with women primarily who had issues with eating disorders and weight behavior management systems, all those kinds of things. And they liked the way I taught, and so they were referring clients. Now, the irony at the time is I was actually twice my size. So not 10'4", I haven't had a massive height reduction. I was twice my size. And I always used to teach the class slightly, embarrassed, wondering if my students thought, is she eating any of this food? This low-fat, quick and easy meals, or is she eating all of this food, So I had a disordered relationship with food, but by helping other people in their relationship, it started to give me insights into mine, and a healing process started. And I went on to become the Victorian Chair of Nutrition Australia. I was the Melbourne president of Slow Food, the curator and co-founder of the World Wellness Project. I consulted to government on public health policy, sat on boards that did that, was on a committee called Body Image and Health. And then I started working with individuals myself on the coaching because, at that point, I had dropped that weight, and I had done that through initially movement. But then by moving my body, I started to develop a healthier relationship, wanting, cleaning my body, so craving better food. And then I started to work with clients, doing lifestyle makeovers and helping them transform their lives and reverse lifestyle diseases, including cancer and chronic conditions. And then I got on the speaking circuit. I was a television personality in Australia, chef, nutritionist, and multimedia mediums that I worked in. And I got on the speaking circuit, loved that, and came to Canada 11 years ago, where I then came back to Canada 11 years ago, where I started a holistic cooking school in Vancouver and teaching it, holistic nutrition schools and speaking again around the world. And then COVID hit. And speaking was the primary source of income for me, and that disappeared overnight. And I really knew right from the onset, March 2020, I started saying to people, "Guys, the government doesn't care about your health." Like, I sat on boards that consulted the government on public health policy. I know they don't care about your health, so this is not what they're saying it is. And in April 2020, I'm writing, "It's easier to fool a man than to convince a man he's fooled," the Mark Twain quote. And I knew something was really wrong. I started to go down the rabbit holes and was deeply disturbed. I had the dark night of the soul, especially when I found out, what was specifically happening to children around the world. Didn't know if I wanted to live, on the planet. And then November 2020, my sister phoned me up and said, "Dad can't care for mom, who was disabled by a fluoroquinolone antibiotic. Would you consider moving into a house she had for rent and taking care of them?" And I said, "Absolutely, but think about this decision really clearly. It's a big deal." She said, "You can do cooking classes and Airbnb." It was a big house, bigger than we needed, and take care of mom. So I moved all my stuff out over the mountains, 28-foot truck, got to Cochrane, unloaded my all my stuff into the house, and she then said, "Oh, by the way, no Airbnb, no cooking classes, no discussion." And I was like, "Whoa, you can't do that. We had an arrangement." And
Mhm.
I, said it's a big deal. So to kind of cap the story, I found a place to take care of my parents, moved them in with me, moved from that place and it was one of many moves in 18 months. So I got here and I was like, what do I do? And I was feeling very, very dark around the world. And that was around March. I remember my mom saying, "You just have lost your spark. You're not the same delightful person." And I said, "Yeah, I'm really disturbed about what's going on." And then I was able to start taking care of a little baby, 1 month old, was never able to have children myself. And so that started to bring me out of my funk. Um, and and then it was children's self-defense, really. I kept thinking, what can I do? I kept asking, how can I serve? What can I do? And it wasn't until I started doing the interviews for children's self-defense that I really felt, okay, this feels right. It feels like I'm contributing in a way that's, meaningful, works for me. And
Mm.
so children's self-defense really saved me through COVID. It provided the platform for me to be able to do something. And so for the longest time around that, I was thinking the work that I'm doing, that I've been doing for 30 years wasn't as important, because we had to stop people from infecting their children with poison and, we had to fight for our freedoms. And I wasn't eating the best because I was indulging you know, um, I was self-soothing through food. So one, I didn't want to be a hypocrite, and two, I felt that there was a bigger imperative. And I got sick in November. My parents got sick. They were deathly ill. And I realized at that point that there's a lot of us in the freedom movement who are self-soothing, not just with food, but substances or addictions, even coffee, cigarettes, smoking, vaping, um, marijuana, alcohol. And I realized that if we don't get strong for our kids, we'll be so easy to push over. Weak people are easy to manipulate and take over. And I realized that everything that I had learned and had been teaching for the last, 30 plus years was really what I needed to be focusing on now, and providing solutions for people rather than just focusing on the problem, helping
Mhm.
people get strong so they can protect their kids. So that's kind of 40 years in a nutshell.
That's great. No, that's superb. And I mean, it's safe to say a lot of people went through that funk and that regrowth and learning to find themselves again, and find their happiness despite what was taking place, coming at them day after day after day and listening to all of the horror stories and the sadness and whatnot. So I
Yeah.
commend you on finding that and breaking free of all of that. That's amazing. But regenerative food philosophy, maybe you can let people know what exactly that means, because even I struggle with that. I,
Yeah.
I got the gist of it, I think,
Yeah.
but let people know what that means.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot in food, in the last 30 years around sustainability. And sustainability is just sustaining what we have. Regenerative food philosophy, the regenerative obviously is it's self-generating, right? So we're not reliant on, you know, getting chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers from external sources. It regenerates itself and it's stronger and healthier, and you produce a better product for it. Now, the food philosophy piece is we have been indoctrinated and programmed in a way to think about our food that is not natural. It's not regenerative. It's not even sustainable. And we're eating, as a species, we're eating ourselves to early deaths, and we're feeding chronic diseases and conditions of which most people are treating it with pharmaceutical interventions, which not only just treat the symptoms, they create more problems. And so we have a very messed up mindset because we've been given so much information. A confused mind cannot make a decision. And if you just look at the food industry in the US alone, the food industry spends $11 billion on creating science and studies, right? That then go out to the public. And I think the latest food pyramid has shown that frosted mini wheats, Lucky Charms are healthier than eggs and beef, you know. And so it's literally an upside down world. We know on many things right now, if you know they're selling it as a truth, it's a lie. and the food industry, I guess I was awake to what was going on because I'd seen the corruption in the 90s with Nutrition Australia, you know, being sponsored by Monsanto. And they would pay them a lot of money to just be seen as friendly and to put on a workshop so that this organization, which was not government funded, it was independent, could then speak kindly about Monsanto as opposed to tell the truth about them. So I saw that corruption early on, and I knew how the system worked. I knew how, like I'd study I'd look at the clinical journals, but Asia Pacific clinical journals for nutrition, and I would see that I could tell that some of these studies were funded by food companies, and that's why you get one journal that would release these peer-reviewed, very credible scientific studies that a nutritionist who wasn't critically thinking would go, oh, I can use this as evidence to support this. Or a dietitian who says, I can use this as evidence to support having people eat these terrible foods like Ensure and, you know, and products that are highly manufactured and processed and contain refined sugars and chemicals and additives. And then the next month you'd see the journal have another story that would almost contradict that and a study. And I could see through the lies of what was happening. And what I noticed is that even when I studied at university, the lecturer who was teaching about dairy was using slides that had the dairy corporation's logo in the bottom right-hand corner. I mean, they weren't even trying to hide how open they were about corporate sponsorship. So, and when I questioned my lecturer, I would say, what about the mucus forming properties of dairy? And she said, oh, sure, I think you'll find that's psychosomatic. And she was really impatient with me because I was earnest. I was asking, I thought you went to university to learn. What I learned at university is you go to be indoctrinated, and if you don't follow exactly what they want you to say and regurgitate, you get big lines through your paper no matter how many references you use. So we've been programmed and indoctrinated. And I have to tell you, you know, the health food industry, the alternative industry can be just as indoctrinating. And people can be just as confused. And so what I did is I used to walk when I was, you know, when I was still in that position as the Victorian Chair of Nutrition Australia. I would walk and I would ask for guidance, and I would say, help me find a way to explain to people how we're meant to eat as the human species so we're not confused. And I start to get downloads, and I will refer to the philosophies I teach as brilliant without a hint of narcissism because they came from that which is greater than me, through me, like a baby. Like you have children that are geniuses and they're brilliant. You don't take credit for their brilliant, but you can take credit for guiding them and molding them. I was given the philosophies, and then I just guided and molded and shaped them into words and ways that people could actually think about. So I have a sense of a pride, just like you have a sense of pride with your children, your beautiful, you know, children. I have a sense with the philosophies, but I know their brilliance comes from that which is greater than me. So the philosophies really help us understand how we're meant to be eating as the human species. And they actually account for the anomalies. And I'll give you an example. I'm running a workshop, a live one here in Edmonton on Sunday, and someone who signed up for it is excited about it, but he's asking me a bunch of questions, texting me a bunch of questions. And he was wondering, he said, "So why aren't you for all these plant milks?" I said, "Well, I don't mind if you make them at home, but most of the ones in the supermarket, you know, um, I'm not a fan of." He said, "Why?" He said, and rather than giving him the answer, I ask a question. How many of the ingredients in that milk that he showed me the nutrition panel for could you make in your backyard? So the philosophical approach is about getting people to think about how they're meant to be eating rather than telling them how they're meant to be eating. It's you start to understand and observe nature. And I've just taken a lot of work out of it for you so you don't have to spend 4 years in university or 3 decades studying food philosophy. The philosophies are simple enough that children understand them and get it. And in fact, children get it better than nutritionists, nutrition students, and dietitians because they have to unravel a lot of indoctrination. So, regenerative food philosophy is about just simply teaching you to fish as opposed to giving you a fish.
Yeah. And that was my next question. What's the
Oh,
difference between nutritionist and food philosophy? What, like, the
yeah,
biggest comparisons there? How can people
yeah,
break it down and understand that? Because there's a
yeah,
lot of similarities within both. One's just kind of based from nature
mm,
and simplicity,
yeah,
whereas nutrition school and more complex. Am
yeah.
I wrong in saying that?
No, you're right. And to give you a kind of a background, it's really hard to make a living as a nutritionist telling people what to eat and what not to eat. Like it's really hard. I look back at my nutrition students, and I would say about 0.5% of them are actually working as a pure nutritionist. And when I mean pure nutritionist, not selling any product, just themselves. So these industries and dietitians, especially so, are very dependent on a product to make money. And if you go to a dietitian's conference, you'll see all these products for sale, and very few of them are actually just broccoli, blueberries. It's very rare to see that. And lots of pharmaceuticals at dietitians' conferences. And you go to a session on the health benefits of wine, and it's sponsored by the wine industry, and the health benefits of coffee is sponsored by the coffee industry. So no matter where you are in the spectrum of, integrity as a nutritionist or dietitian, it's very hard to just make money selling knowledge and people coming to you and saying, eat this, don't eat this. So that can actually cloud people's ability to tell the truth, even if it's unconscious. So the difference between I'm a nutritionist, but I just also moved to the more philosophical approach because what I found is when I just told people eat this and don't eat this, they had this level of success. When I started to move more into the philosophies, so they got it, so they weren't dependent on me. I don't want to create followers and dependents. I want to create people who get it, understand it, and can lead other people, their family, their friends, and teach their other family. So we're all spreading the word faster. I don't want you to keep coming back to me saying, what about this product? Can I have this product? I want to teach you how to understand that for yourself so you're not dependent on me. When I started teaching people the philosophies, they had another layer and level of success. When I got them into the kitchen to prepare their own food, took them to farmers markets, showed them, what they could be sourcing from and showed them how to prepare it so it tasted delicious, they had this level of success. And then when I moved them on to what I started to understand and I saw with my clients, I'll give you a story, but there's 2 stories I'll tell. One, I was speaking at a conference in Tasmania in about 2005 or 7, I can't remember. But this guy comes up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, my ex-girlfriend, both of her parents were dietitians." And I said, "Did she have an eating disorder?" And he was like shocked and he took a step back and he's like, "That's quite a cheeky question to ask." And I said, "Well, did she?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, she did." So those 2 dietitians had tons of information. But like I said, information doesn't necessarily lead to clarity. It can lead to confusion. And particularly if you have food issues and you project them onto a child, it can mess with their head and they can develop a very unnatural and unhealthy relationship with food. So that's the kind of the first story. The second story is one of my dear friends who is battling cancer in Australia. She said, "Sherry, you got to read this book." And this was in about 2008, I think, 2009. And she said, "You got to read this book called When the Body Says No." She said, "This guy puts into words exactly how you work with people." And if anyone knows that book, it's by Gabor Mate, who's a doctor in Vancouver. And it's The Hidden Cost of Stress. So what I was discovering on my own, and Gabor Mate puts it into beautifully, into this book, is that when I was working with people, I knew that their food issues were just, the tip of the iceberg, and what drove their behavior was all under the water. And when I started to work with people and looked at where are they toxic mentally, emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically, and how can we start to remove those toxins and nourish them mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the changes in the physical became so much easier. And when clients didn't do that work or wouldn't do that work, their level of success was short term. They might have had great success, short term, but it wasn't sustainable because they weren't actually looking at the driving behaviors behind what they were, why they were choosing to eat.
Right. Right. Now, let me get your opinion on this because
Mhm.
I'm a little bit conflicted with this word, you know, with
Great.
being so with pharma,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical. What
Yeah.
is your take on nutraceuticals? I mean, I know that they
Mhm.
are marketed as good and something completely separate,
Yeah.
but you still have half of that tail on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I was very anti-supplement up until 3 years ago. So I'd lived in Melbourne, farmers market year round, organic food year round. Most of the stalls were organic, right?
Mhm.
Not certified. Some of the non-certified grew better than the certified, right? Because they grew with integrity. Um, so I was nourished. I didn't have health problems. I could get everything from my food. And because I wasn't eating the things that were causing problems, I was fine. And then Vancouver, 11 years, I could still get organic food year round, greens, luscious that were locally grown without chemicals. Um, and then 3 years ago, when 5G hit, and then a year after that, I moved to northern Alberta, I could not get, the food that I normally, and even I wasn't getting anywhere near it, and I was paying, in some cases twice as much for it. So it wasn't sustainable for me to continue to eat like I was. I couldn't do it here. And it gave me a lot of empathy for people who would say to me many years ago, but I can't eat that way. And I would say, well, you'll find a way. And it was a humbling experience. It was actually, probably humbling is a nice word. It was more humiliating. And I was struggling to get what I needed from food. I started a supplement company because of that. But I wanted to be a different supplement company in that supplement, we need to understand it's to supplement what you're eating. You can't supplement your way out of a bad diet. Now, I'll tell you, there's a ton of crap supplements out there. And a lot of the supplement companies that are big were bought out by pharmaceutical companies. So they're just slowly adding, toxic, low grade products into it. They're changing formulations. And that's why a lot of nutritionists and dietitians will say you're just making expensive urine when you buy these supplements. It's because they were referring to bad supplements. And when I was well known in Australia, I would get approached weekly by a supplement company or multi-level marketing company that said, "Will you promote our products?" And I would try them, but I never found anything that made a difference for me that I would be willing to put my name behind. So even though I have a supplement company, to help build immunity, and I tried to select formulations um, that were, building immunity from natural products and not
Mhm.
synthesized ingredients. So number one, with any nutraceutical or supplement, I don't care how much science is behind it. if you can't grow it and make it yourself, I'm not a fan of it. And I'll reiterate this because it's so important to say you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet. So I believe right now our food is being severely denatured. We're facing, chemical warfare from our skies in the form of chemtrails. Um, and that's well documented. There are university studies and plenty of documentation to show that's a real and valid thing. And if you think plaid clouds are natural, um, you need to maybe put on a tinfoil hat, and maybe it will attract some intelligence to you. But our food is denatured. It's shipped all over and it's processed. And even just growing in my own garden, I know from the spraying that they did above, it affected the quality of it. There's some things from the garden I've refused to eat because I didn't feel safe eating them. So we still have to try and get the best we can to nourish ourselves. We have to, more important than that, stop poisoning ourselves willingly. So there's so much. Jason Christoff says, the government gets us to do stuff that we never would do to ourselves. Like if someone said, here, take this poison, it shuts off, with every cup of this poison, it shuts off 40% of the blood flow to your brain. And you're going to drink it thinking that's going to wake you up. And you're going to drink it thinking that's going to make you smarter so you can concentrate, when it's actually shutting off blood flow to your brain.
Don't forget what we've learned from the cigarette industry as well, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember back in the 50s when you had ads with pregnant women smoking, and this is the number one brand doctors recommend to pregnant women? Well, look how it turned out, friends. We are there. It's not our doctors, it's the government.
Yeah. And, so, we're poisoning ourselves voluntarily. And I'll tell you why. Because it's really stressful being a human. In the world we're living in right now, it's scary. There's some really dark things that are happening daily that we see that just, bring us to tears. And so it's really natural to want to avoid that. And if a substance can numb you out, like for years, I would have a cup of coffee and I would get this beautiful heart opening effect. And I would tell people, I literally feel like I'm in love, and I want to phone everyone on my phone, and tell them I love them when I have my cup of coffee. Now, 30 minutes later, I'm driving in traffic and giving people the bird, right? But while I had that coffee, and I figured it out. It wasn't until I, figured that piece out. Oh, 40% of the blood flow to my brain's being cut off. So I can actually feel my heart because my brain's so busy and I'm such in my head, I'm overactive here. That's what it did for me. And I'm not saying that we can't have these things. I have a philosophy that I teach called pick your poisons. But there's a point where you're choosing them or they're choosing you. And what I found is that if I had a cup of coffee every other day, it was no problem. I could easily say no to it. But as soon as I started to have a cup of coffee every day, I needed that cup of coffee. It became, ritual. I needed to participate and a feeling I needed to have. And then it was running me. I wasn't running it. So to get back to nutraceuticals, your original question, only really good quality stuff, only stuff that's plant-based and you can actually make in nature. Only if you're taking care of your diet first. The first place you should be spending your money is on good, clean spring water. Number one, it is our second most primary nutrient. We are life dependent on. And people will cheap out. They'll buy, a cup of Timmy's every day and say, yeah, spring water, BH-free bottles are going to the spring. It's too expensive. But they'll literally spend hours collectively in the drive-through at Timmy's and spend the equivalent that if they just put that towards spring water, it would make a massive difference because tap water is toxic. And honestly, there's two things about filters. There's no filter that can filter out all the pharmaceutical drugs. Okay, the tap water has a typical tap water sample has 32 pharmaceutical drugs residue in it. And most of the filters that people are using, the more fancy they are, the more they actually pollute and destroy the third world countries they're actually made in. So it's basically, we don't want to eat right. We don't want to source our own water. So we're going to poison other countries so we can just have a filter that takes care of it for us. And this is the whole piece, is that the philosophical bent is to get us to start to think in a much more natural way. And, I half wanted to call my book, when I republished it, How God Wants Us to Eat. Not what, but how. Because we've deviated so far away from nature that most people, including dietitians and nutritionists, don't know what natural is. Like having a smoothie. I had a smoothie at a Longevity Now conference years ago that had like 40 different ingredients in it. And they're all superfoods, but they were medicinals. They weren't foods. Medicinal is something that you have when you're sick to treat a situation. It's not a food you have every single day. And I was constipated for 3 days after having that smoothie. Like, you know, um,
Yeah.
we have to think more naturally about how we're meant to eat. And if we want to sustain ourselves, particularly under the threats that we're under right now with, food security, we need to source what I refer to in my book as slow, seasonal, local, organic, and whole. We need to support our farmers and go back to much more natural eating.
I love that. I love that. Simple over convenience, right?
Yeah,
Convenience, they've taught us how to be lazy. They've taught us how to forget how to do everything for ourselves, how to do any research, how to debate with respect. And it all ties into one.
yeah, it does.
And it's all by design at the end of the day, because look at where we are. We are an ignorant species, and it's no one's fault. We've all fallen for it. We've
Mm,
just all come out of it at our own pace,
yeah,
and if I can help one person, I've done my job, and I know you feel the same way, and bravo to you. um, I want to ask you, you say making things at home is the most important. What are the three top things that you would suggest for people to make at home that's easy for beginners?
yeah,
So people don't freak
yeah,
out and think, oh,
yeah,
there's too much to this.
yeah,
Because that's the problem too.
yep,
That part of it has been kind of sucked out of us as well. And if it's
yeah,
too simple, we're overthinking things,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So one of the philosophies I teach is the replace principle. And when I'm working with people, I don't get them to change anything as far as what they're eating in, so don't stop eating ice cream, don't stop eating pizza, but find the best quality ice cream that's naturally made with ingredients you could make in your own backyard if you're not willing to make it. Okay. So the cost, the cost alone will restrict your consumption nowadays, unless you're a billionaire. The cost alone will restrict your consumption. But another thing that's going to happen when you have real ice cream versus the stuff in the big tubs with all the fillers, and the crap stuff in it, it's far more satiating and satisfying. And so your body actually shuts off and said, I've had enough. Waste, it won't shut off with the other ice cream, because we often think, oh, we're meant to eat till we're full or partially full. Well, that's not how the body actually says stop eating. In nature, the body stops eating when it's nourished, when it has sufficient nourishment. Okay, so when you're eating, it's why you can drink a quarter of a cup of cane juice and go, whoa, that's enough, and still have 2-liter bottle of a soft drink and go, I can drink more of it, right? So there's tons of nutrients in freshly pressed cane juice, and the body says, I've had enough. It's sweet. I like it, but I've had enough. So what I do is start to replace your salt in your kitchen with real salt. If you don't have a naturally sourced sea salt or rock salt, get that and replace it. So you're not, and you're not changing everything all at once, because that's too overwhelming. Um, get a good quality oil. Like if you're cooking in oil, I don't recommend a lot of, cooking in oil, but if you are, just switch from the white oils you get in clear bottles to coconut oil, cold pressed coconut oil, and cook with that, or butter or lard. But make sure they're organic sources, because toxins, you can't remove the toxins from fat. They don't have the technology. They're not doing that, and they're not interested in doing that. So the top 3 for me is just to start to replace ingredients in your home with natural versions of it. And what you'll find, that alone will make a big difference, because just by doing that, you're doing 2 things. You're removing a lot of toxins, and 2, you're now putting in nutrients. And if you study terrain theory, I know you do, you know about it, and a lot of people are catching on to it. The 2 causes for disease are toxicity and poisoning, and malnourishment, so the lack of nutrients in our body. So as you start to do that, remove the toxins, start to bring in things that actually nourish, energize, and protect your body, you crave these a lot less. And then your body starts to heal because it doesn't have to fight and deal with all these toxic chemicals.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I know, and maybe you can answer this for me because I've heard conflicting info on this. You aren't supposed to cook with olive oil. You're supposed to eat olive oil and cook with something like avocado oil. Is that accurate?
No, avocado oil is a big one that's marketed. You can't make the oil that we have as avocado oil is not something you can make in your backyard. Okay. Think about avocados. Like, you have to cook them and use, ways of expressing them with heptane and hexane and things like that. So I keep going back. Can you make the fat in your backyard? What fats can you make in your backyard? Well, not necessarily we could grow coconuts here, but if you could grow coconuts, you could make coconut oil. You can make butter. You can make lard. And those are the ones you want to cook with. So the fats that you can make. Olive oil, the good olive oil, the only olive oil you should be consuming, yes, if it is fried at a high temperature, it basically breaks down and becomes toxic. Okay, so the more pure an oil is, the more fragile it is when we actually fry with it. So, but any oil, I don't use any seed or nut oil that's being that I couldn't actually make myself. Right. And the reason why is, if you can't do it in nature, I believe that, if what's good for the body is good for the planet. What's good for the planet is good for the body without exception. If you can't make it in nature, it's most likely harmful to you, your body, and the planet. So nature's one of the philosophies I teach is nature tells us what to eat in the quantities to eat it and by how easily it's obtained in nature. So that which is most abundant, we're meant to have most of. And there's a hierarchy that nature actually communicates that to us. Okay. So our most primary nutrient we are life dependent on is everywhere. It's air. And when I would teach this to nutrition students, they go, air's not a nutrient, because they're used to, the supplement that's got to be, or a vitamin or mineral. I was like, well, what's the definition of nutrient? That which is required for growth. Try and grow something without air. Not in your body, it's not going to happen. And our second most abundant the planet tells us this, right? Covers 70% of the planet. Your body composite is 70% water, right? There's this beautiful synergy that nature tells us, what to eat, how we're meant to eat, what we're meant to eat in the quantities that's found in nature. So that which is most abundant, we're meant to have most of. Harder to obtain in nature, we're meant to have less of it. And if you cannot get it in nature, not only is it harmful to you, it's harmful to the planet. And so if you look at that hierarchy of between vegetables and fruits, and you have to grow something and you want to eat immediately, and we are a species that has survived because of finding the most expedient, convenient way of eating. It's just been weaponized against us, you see now. But it actually was a survival tool. So something that is in all of us, the desire to have convenience, it's a survival. It's, I call it an evolutionary tool, an evolutionary tool that everyone has. If we all have it, it's been something that's designed in the body to help us survive. So if I give you an apple seed and a broccoli seed, and you have to feed your family, you have nothing else to eat, well, you're going to choose the broccoli seed because you can grow that into sprouts immediately. And that's going to produce vegetables, within a few weeks, right? But the apple seed, it takes years for that tree to actually produce fruit. But even then, say I have a mature apple tree and I have broccoli that's growing in the garden. What bears, something you can eat first? Well, it's the broccoli. See, with the apple tree, you not only have to wait till it's mature, you don't eat an apple when it's mature. It tastes horrible, right? You wait until it's ripened. So you have all of these vegetables through the season, and then you have the fruit at the end of the season that you can actually store and keep over winter and, preserve. Um, but most of the nutrients are actually infused into that apple in the ripening process. So that's why most people who are eating fruit from a supermarket that's picked at maturity and put in storage sometimes for years. They actually have the technology to store fruit for years and then just ripen it with the ethylene gases, and that's why you'll eat one of those apples and it'll be like it's sweet, but it doesn't have much flavor and the body's not getting the response to eat more because it's not full of nutrients. I remember the first time I had a biodynamic apple. It wasn't the first time, but I bought 6 little Granny Smith apples from the Queen Victoria Market. I was on the tram, and they were small, and I was eating it, and I was like, I was making the "I'll have what she's having" noises. I was like, ooh, and I noticed, people were looking at me around me, kind of like weirdo. But that apple was so delicious because it had been grown properly. It was full of phytonutrients, the color, flavor, and aroma compounds that made that apple amazing. But it wasn't, like kind of going back to we have all of this low to the ground that's most powerful and delicious when it's young, nutritious. As it ages, it diminishes in nutrients and the flavor becomes bitter. It's less palatable. Whereas this, do you see the picture that nature actually paints for us? It tells us what to eat. It's like God knew that these people are going to need help figuring out what to eat. They can't figure it out for themselves, so I got to make it really easy for them. So it's kind of like nutrition for dummies. Just follow nature's principle.
Well, let me ask you this then. Organic, local, shipped.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is the acronym SLOW. Now, Professor Mark Cohen came up with it. I was always annoyed I didn't actually come up with that acronym, but I use it all the time, so I have to give him attribution. But seasonal, local, organic, and whole. So I will choose organic from far away rather than the commercial apples at the supermarket.
Okay.
So, but saying that, I don't eat. I actually source my Macintosh apples, my favorite. I buy a box, in September, and I know it's from BC. They're organic. But I don't eat strawberries in the winter. I don't eat raspberries, as in from the supermarket. I'll buy them in the summer. I'll freeze some, but I'll eat most of them in the summer and freeze some. So part of developing a natural relationship with food is what I call the consumption concept. Understanding what would you eat if you had to source your own food in nature? Like, think about it. If I was to put a cup of blueberries in my smoothie every single day, how many blueberries would I have to grow and source and preserve in the summer? Right? And I certainly wouldn't be eating bananas. And I have a crazy banana story that I talk about in my lectures that helps us understand that most of what we're eating is out of season. It's from far away. It's it hasn't been grown with the integrity that something is local. So I eat a lot of potatoes in winter because particularly now where I live, because the people who lived in this area survived on potatoes. A lot of the time I eat cabbage. My diet isn't as glamorous. Doesn't mean I don't eat good things. I'm not a purist. I'm like a highly flawed expert, right? Okay, so I have chocolate, right? But when I do have chocolate, I eat like amazing chocolate, like $10, $12, $13 a bar chocolate. So when I have a little bit, because I'm frugal, I value it. Like it takes me a week to get through that chocolate bar. I won't eat it in one setting, not just because of the cost factor and my frugality, but because it's so delicious and satisfying. It's made so well. It takes very little to satiate me. Don't know if I answered your question though.
You did. Now we have a few questions here in the chat.
Right.
Joanne wants, well, I love this comment by Joanne. I can see no reason why everyone can't grow their own microgreens and sprouts. unless you have cats. I keep trying, I keep failing. It's the cats.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Joanne also says, "How about roasted sesame seed oil? Is that okay? It sure tastes good."
Yeah. Well, what I will say is most of the roast once you roast a seed oil, it diminishes in nutrients and dramatically. But yeah, it does taste great. And so it's part of that pick your poisons. If it's organic and it's roasted sesame oil, you'll be paying a stack for a little bottle, and that will conserve your consumption of it. So you're not going to be eating stacks of it. It's not going to be super healthy if it's roasted. And then when you add it into your food, but if you're just eating small amounts for that flavor and sesame oil, you don't need a lot. It's your choice. It's like with the whole concept of pick your poisons, it's every culture had their addictive substances. They had things that were actually toxic that they had that changed their state, or they ate for pleasure and things like that. But the process of actually having to source them themselves dramatically limited their consumption of it. Now we can get anything we want with no physical effort. Literally, I can go on my computer, I can get it delivered. And if I have one of those little chairs, I can actually motorize myself to the door and basically get the amount of food that it would take me years and hard labor to actually to produce that food. And I can get it with the push of a button. And so when we can actually, if you had to source your own food in nature, you'd make completely different decisions. I would as well. But when we don't have to source it ourselves, when we don't have to exert the effort, when we don't know all the complexities that are involved in it, we make very different choices. There's dishes at home I never make because even though I'm a chef, I've worked in top restaurants, some of the best restaurants in the world. I won't make it because I'm just like, I'm into convenience. I like simple food, like the taste of it. But when I go out to a really good restaurant, when I mean a good restaurant, it's not necessarily expensive, and it's not necessarily high end, but they make things from scratch and integrity. Those are the kind of restaurants I like a good, authentic, handmade pasta kind of restaurant. I will order the handmade pasta, not for health reasons, but because it tastes so delicious, and I know it's going to be made so exquisitely. So sesame oil, your call. You're not going to use it in large amounts, and it depends on what else you're eating. Because I can say, oh, I only have one glass of wine a day, or I only have one glass of wine a week. Well, I only have one gin and tonic a week. Well, I only have one beer a week. Well, I only have, do you know what I mean? We can just one it and accumulatively have a very toxic diet. So you have to figure out what your toxic load is, what you're willing to be patient with. And there's certain things I eat knowing it's not healthy. Like when I have a cup of coffee, I source the best coffee. I have half and half, and I have organic half and half, or cream from the, raw cream from the farmer, and I have coconut palm sugar. None of those things am I ever eating thinking, oh, this is really healthy for me. I'm eating it knowing that it's an indulgence and that I have to make up for it in some way in the day to nourish myself or not have something else that I might like in order for me to wake up tomorrow morning feeling good in my body.
Awesome. Awesome. And so before we get going here, I'm going to post this one up. I wanted to talk about your book first, but I'm going to do this first because we're
Sure.
running out of time. But you also have a course on regenerative food philosophy coming up.
Yeah.
Tell us how it would benefit people participating in it, and how can they get there? How can they find you? What can they
Yeah.
expect?
So I'm just going to pop in here because I can't pop in the comments. If you could pop this link up, it's ipac.edu. It's the same one you've got, but it's / regenerative not slash line food line philosophy. So that's the course I'm teaching. It's a 12-week course helping people to really inculcate and get these concepts. And obviously I go into more depth than what I can cover in an hour. That's where I'll be teaching this course on regenerative food philosophy. I've written a book called Return to Food, and I'm writing another book based on this course, or this course is based on the book, Survival of the Wisest. And those two books, basically, when you let them know that I referred you, I'm gifting anyone who's referred, put me as a referral, both of those books in ebook form. And if you just want to buy the book on its own, it's super easy. you can buy it on Kindle, Return to Food, or you can just email me and I will send it via WeTransfer for a $10 donation. So Sherry@sherrystrong.com. Email me for Return to Food, $10 donation. I'll send it via WeTransfer. And the Regenerative Food Philosophy course starts February 2nd, so which I'm excited to be teaching.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. Yeah, there's been a lot of good reviews on your course, so I'm excited to kind of dig a little bit more into it. One of these days, I will have time. I promise you, I will do it. Talk to us about your book or books. I know Return to Food was the last one, and I know you've got one coming out, and you did just mention that. But talk to us about how, why.
Well, people say, did it take you long to write that book? I said, no, about 14 years. And the reason it took so long, not because it's a big book, it's, less than 200 pages and 50, there's 50 recipes in it. So it's not all a food book, and there's 50 illustrations in it. So there's not a huge amount of text to go through, but I will share something. Just the other day, one of my students who I taught, she became a Return to Food coach. She's now got her own business as the embodied nutritionist. Her name's Chancey Dawn. And she sent me this message the other day, which was such a gift out of the blue. So remember, my book was published in 2014. And here it is. Okay. And she said, so I picked up a book recently that I'm well versed in, but haven't read for some time. It's so flipping good. And flipping is a different word, and it's all capitalized. She said, so many gems, Sherry. Thank you for this gift you brought to the world. And she includes a photo of my book. So that book, I believe it's food philosophy is kind of going just beyond information and moving into wisdom. And the philosophies really help us. People, when I do the public lectures, and the keynote speaking, people will say, I can listen to it all day. And this is my belief, my experience. When I can listen to a speaker all day, it's because they're not just spewing information at me. It's because there's wisdom involved in it. And I also believe there's a piece where they're telling us something that's encoding us, already encoded in our DNA. And it's just causing us to remember what we already know, but is not spoken out in the world. We've got all this noise that's counter to what we know in our gut and our knowing. And when someone starts speaking to you and they start telling you something that you already know in a way that remembers it, and they put into words something that you've always known, you can listen to it all day. 100%. And so that's what I put in the book, Return to Food. And then survival of the wisest. I believe that's where we are right now, is that it will be the wise who survive, not the smartest, not the richest, but the wisest. And there's ways that we need to not just survive, but can actually thrive. And, I've taught people how by spending less on their food budget, they can actually be more nourished, so it's not about, having to get the latest superfoods and the most expensive supplements. There's a wisdom in how we actually sustain ourselves. And I think that's what we need to tap into. And that's what that book that I will be writing based on so I'm using the course to flesh out the content for the book. And it's Return to Food 2.0.
Awesome. So not only are you an author, a professor, you are also in the pre-production phase of a new show that is the culmination of your work to date. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and I think we kind of alluded to it before, is what I noticed when I was speaking at the rallies, that people were not taking care of themselves. They were weakening themselves, doing things to themselves so that if the government made them do it, they refused to, right? They just, they were coping strategies. And what I noticed is in a lot of the interviews I was doing and a lot of the rallies, I was focusing on the problem, and other people were focusing on the problem. I thought, you get what you focus on. So if we just keep focusing on what's wrong with this world, we're going to manifest more of it. And what we need to do is focus on solutions and what we want. And in order to get that clear mind and that strong body, we have to start taking care of ourselves. So The new show will have experts that help us get strong, not just in nutrition, and food, which I'll be covering, but in areas of the law, knowing the law in order to protect yourself, natural law and God's law, building community, homeschooling, natural birth, parenting, all those areas, self-sabotage, so bringing in experts like Jason Christoph who can talk to that piece. And what I like about my experts is that they're actually living it. Doesn't mean they're perfect. I am by no means a perfect eater, but I am living the philosophies and I'm striving. I'm constantly working towards it. There are people who eat way better than I do. Okay. But the difference is that they're not inspired to teach it. And even if they did, they couldn't teach it as well as I could teach it because I've put so much thought into it. It's rarely I walk into a room and I know there's someone who's put more thought into food and nutrition and how we're meant to eat as the human species than myself. That's, being my mission. So getting strong is about helping us to get strong because weak people are easily overcome. And so we need to be strong mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
Amazing. Amazing. And for everybody out there watching, please know that we have Sherry every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for what she likes to call the Northern Defenders series. I'm a big believer in empowering, educating, and getting people to activate in this life. It's time for us to take responsibility for ourselves, develop the skills we need, come back together as a community, unify, and help build each other up. So I like that it fits into that quite well. You're going to find Children's Health Defence Canada not only advocating for children regularly, but trying to empower families as a whole in taking charge of their life now. So we're going to be looking into alternative therapies. We're going to be looking into food. We're going to be looking into 5G even more, PFAS, fluoride, the whole 9 yards. GMOs, obviously, that's an understatement. And the good old quackaroo. So that's where we stand there. What I wanted to say is thank you, Sherry, for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure, and it's always very interesting when you come on. I hope we can do this again, and maybe bring in a few extra people who can attest to your course and speak about it, maybe. So I hope we can do that. And for everybody out there, I wanted to let you know that we have an upcoming event in Toronto. We've got the Justice for the Vaccinated tour in Toronto on February 4th and 5th. That's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be the first event I've been at in over a year due to being kind of locked in my home because of my dad's Pfizer experiences. But these are all the speakers. You can join us on the 4th or 5th. And let's see here. You can get your tickets at vaxjustice.org. So I hope you'll consider joining us. It's going to be a great day. I'll be there speaking, and a lot of other people like Kristen Nagel and Dr. Shoemaker, Glenn Jung, Dr. Joe Kellerstein, who I cannot say enough good about because he is the naturopath that helped me with Dad as he made it into an Ontario hospital, and we got the healing going from the inside out. So yeah, let me get rid of that. Bring Sherry in. So again, Sherry, I would want to thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you'll come back again and talk more about what you do so well. So thank you. And thank you for being a part of Children's Health Defense. Have a great day, everybody.